Hello, everyone, and welcome. Thank you for attending our webinar today on the VitalSigns for SSH Tectia cost-effective end-to-end security for all ZOS file transfers. My name is Yvonne Wheaton, and I'll be your moderator today. I represent Software Diversified Services. This is your dashboard. You'll notice there's a question box section. If you have any questions during our presentation today, please send them to us in your question box. We'll be doing a Q&A session at the end. Documents and white papers can be found in your handout section in your dashboard as well. You can also reach us by email after the webinar at info@stsusa.com or 1-800-443-6183. I'd like to introduce you to our speakers. Again, I'm Yvonne Wheaton. I'm in the marketing department at SDS. I have over 30 years in the IT enterprise environment in both vendor and system shops. Bob Thomas is the CEO and founder of Enterprise Systems Media and the publisher of the Enterprise Executive and Enterprise Tech Journal magazine. For over 30 years, Enterprise Systems Media, Inc. has been serving the information needs of IT professionals at Fortune 500 size enterprises throughout the world. Stu Henderson from Henderson Consulting is one of the foremost ZOS security experts. Colin Vanderos is a senior systems engineer here at SDS. He's an expert in our network software solutions and security solutions. Here's our agenda for the next 50 minutes or so. I'm doing the introduction. Bob Thomas from Enterprise Systems Media will be sharing the results from the Enterprise Systems Media 2016 Security Survey. Stu Henderson from the Henderson Group will be discussing securing FTP in cross-platform environments. Colin Vanderos from Software Diversified Services will be providing insight into the VFTP SSH Collaboration software, followed by a demo. And remember, we'll be providing Q&A at the end. So SDS, or Software Diversified Services, has been providing mainframe solutions to the market for over 34 years. Our headquarters are located in Minneapolis, Minnesota. SDS now supports over 20 ZOS, MVS, VSE, and VM mainframe systems products. Our flagship products are dedicated to network management, security solutions, and performance solutions. SDS is a leading provider of enterprise infrastructure software for multiple platforms, with a 34-year history of delivering award-winning support and customer-centric IT infrastructure solutions. We have over 1,000 licensed customers worldwide, including Global 500 companies. Over the years, we've developed more solutions for the distributed environment. We've added to our mainframe product line, and we've partnered with subject matter experts for effective software solutions. Our development staff is continually providing updates and enhancements to our products. SDS has strived to bring software solutions to the marketplace that provide both cost savings while still using elegant and state-of-the-art functionality. So without further ado, I'd like to turn this presentation over to Bob Thomas from Enterprise Systems Media. Bob?
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. We recently conducted the 2016 Security Survey to gain insight into the use of FTP security. I would like to present some of the findings from this survey to you. To begin, we asked respondents if their company could measure and/or identify all FTP traffic moving in and out of their ZOS mainframes. As you can see, just over 44% of the respondents either can't measure or identify the FTP traffic or don't know if they can measure it. I ask you, is that a security exposure? Next up, securing FTP. When we asked readers if their shop has implemented secure alternatives to FTP on ZOS, nearly 30% of the shops reported that they have not implemented secure alternatives to FTP. Next, let's see how many batch jobs rely on FTP. As you can see here, 65% of companies have up to 499 batch jobs that rely on FTP, and almost 16% have 3,000 or more. That is quite a few, but certainly not insurmountable in migrating to a more secure technology and eliminating a potentially large security exposure. Instead of a yes or no question, we wanted to know what the top 5 requirements for secure file transfer are from all of the respondents. Of the 17 options listed, the top 5 were automation, visibility and monitoring of all mainframe file transfers, encryption, seamless migration of batch jobs without JCL changes, and support for native ZOS datasets. These all seem to revolve around what is needed to ease migration for the technical team. While there is good news for the 40% who don't have an outstanding audit related to FTP vulnerabilities, it is worrisome to see that 22% do have an outstanding audit for a very real security exposure, and 37% don't know if they have an outstanding audit item or not related to FTP vulnerabilities. Furthermore, 40% of our respondents don't know if they would pass an audit on FTP compliance, and 14.5% know they would not pass.
Thank you, Bob, for the interesting survey results. I'll now hand the presentation over to Stu Henderson from Henderson Consulting. Stu?
Thanks, everyone. Today we're going to talk about some unusual considerations for securing FTP cross-platform. Now, a lot of organizations have learned stuff the hard way and not always benefited from the mistakes that others have learned. So we're going to talk a little bit about what's happened in the past and mistakes people have made and what they've learned from making them. And then we'll talk about a structured approach to think about FTP security. We'll start by explaining what FTP is and how it works, and then we'll talk about how to consider the security of it, and then we'll summarize with the most important issues to consider, and we'll see where we go from there. So here's our agenda. We'll start with a little introduction and history. Then we'll talk about basics of FTP. So if you don't really know what FTP is or what's going on with it, we'll lay some groundwork, and that will lay a foundation for us to talk about how we secure FTP. We'll give you some examples to show you some ways to think about what we're covering, and then we'll wrap it up with a summary and a call to action. First, basics. FTP stands for File Transfer Protocol. It's a set of rules. It's a set of rules for standardized transfer of files between computers, and when we say cross-platform, we're talking about different types of computers like mainframes or Windows or Unix or whatever. So one definition of FTP is it's the set of rules. But many people, when they say FTP, they really mean the software that is running on the computers that follows those standards to transfer files from one computer to another. Now, a long time ago, the way we transferred files from one location to another was someone would print the file and snail mail it to the other site, and someone would have to do data entry off that printout, and of course that was just not acceptable for a lot of reasons. So to get things better, someone tried copying the file to tape and mailing the tape, and then the tape was computer readable on the other end, but in some cases the tape got stolen off the delivery truck. And in some cases, if the tape had customer information or social security numbers or sensitive data for whatever reason, this got into legal hassles, and Congress has spent a lot of time saying, well, if you encrypt the data on the tape that's stolen from the truck, then you're not liable, but if you didn't encrypt it, then you're liable for whatever happens, whatever damages are caused by exposure of the sensitive data. So this was considered insecure unless you were doing encryption, but it was still way too slow and too difficult. And finally, someone invented TCPIP, which is a way for computers to talk to each other over a network, and on top of TCPIP, they added the File Transfer Protocol. Now this works on Unix, Windows mainframes, any type of computer. It works over the internet. When we say cross-platform, we're talking about different types of computer. It also goes across oceans. You can do this around the world now that we have the internet. And some versions support some types of encryption. There are lots of different types of encryption and different standards for this. But in general, FTP is finally, it's considered fast and easy once it's set up, and it's securable if you know what you're doing and have the right versions of software. Now, in some organizations, we're still talking about things that happened in the past and the way people learned stuff the hard way and how we can benefit from it. Because in some organizations, they found that each user could implement his own version of FTP. Everybody had a PC and everybody would do whatever his favorite version of the FTP software was, and that would be okay if those different versions talk to each other. But sometimes different versions, for a variety of reasons, were not able to talk to each other or were not able to encrypt smoothly, so they had problems with that. Some organizations also found that if you let users decide whether to encrypt and what type of encryption to use, they could end up using different methods that would not work or failing to encrypt because it didn't occur to them and they were in a hurry. So this whole approach, while it's a big improvement over mailing printouts, it was still considered somewhat insecure, disruptive, at least in the case when the different versions of the FTP didn't act well. So in other organizations, some more things we learned the hard way. If two versions of the FTP software don't work together, the users waste time and they get frustrated. We also found that different computers have different ways of encoding bytes. A byte is a character of information. And there are two encoding methods, ASCII and EBCDIC. There's also, if you're going to be using different alphabets, double byte character sets, and big endian versus little endian. And if you don't know what big endian and little endian are, you don't want to know, just recognize there are different ways of encoding stuff on computers, and you need to provide translation between one and the other on occasion if you're working with different types of computers. So we found also some users wouldn't activate encryption even when it was needed or required by regulation because it didn't occur to them. And the lesson from that was you need to make your encryption automatic anytime that it's needed. Some more things we learned. You needed some standardization for FTP, both within and without your organization, because if it's not standardized, you end up with different versions that sometimes don't talk to each other or sometimes have difficulty translating the different ways of coding data or don't encrypt and decrypt smoothly together. But if you get this right, if you standardize it well, you can find the whole result is more efficient, more secure, and if you have automatic encryption when it's needed, it ends up being more compliant with regulations. Last item here is if you're talking about managing an operation, it's very common for someone to turn to the head of a data center or the head of a network and say, well, tell me, what files are you sending to where? And the management doesn't know that. It's hard to manage FTP. It's hard to demonstrate that your FTP security is what it needs to be. It's hard to demonstrate to the auditors that your security is what it needs to be if you don't have a clear picture of what files are being transferred to and where, and also if you don't know which of those are being encrypted. So with that as some history and some of the issues we need to be thinking about, let's step back and start with a description of FTP Basics. There are two commands in FTP. To download a file, you use the get command, and if you want to upload a file, now by upload we mean you've got a file on your computer and you want to send it or upload it to some other computer, you use the put command. So you've got get and put, and two other vocabulary words that become important are client and server. Anytime you have two computers talking over a network, one of them will be the client, the other one will be the server. And you'll see in some of our examples how this falls out. But it will simplify things if you recognize the client is always the computer that speaks first. So if you want to upload or download a file to another computer, that is get or put, you start by running the FTP Client program on the computer you are using. And you tell that FTP Client program on your computer to shake hands with the other computer, the FTP Server. So you can see already client and server are going to make a difference. One computer and one FTP program will be the client, the other will be the server. If you're making the request, your program is going to be the client version of FTP, and will be making requests of the server version of FTP. So you start your FTP client program on the computer you're working on, and you tell it to shake hands with the FTP server. That is, you have to tell it the name or the location or the address of the computer that has the other version of FTP, the server FTP. And of course, there's an interesting question. How do you prove to that server who you are? And do you need to prove who you are? If what you're talking about is an advertising message, maybe you don't need to make people prove their identity. But if you're downloading a customer master file or credit card information, you want to make sure that whoever is making the request to get the file is the person who's authorized to do that. So after you prove who you are, very often with a user ID and password, you then, sitting at your client FTP program, you issue commands to request gets and puts. This brings up 3 security issues. The first one is, how do you know the identity of the FTP server? How do you know that it's the computer and the version of FTP on that computer that you want to be talking to? Second, when the data is going over the network, any data going over the internet or even an internal intranet, you almost certainly want to have that data encrypted if it's sensitive or if it includes passwords. And the third question is, who is allowed to upload and download what files? If you say any user who logs on to FTP can download any file, you're going to have security issues. So you need to control file access for the FTP programs. And of course, what I've just described, these 3 issues, are from your point of view, the client FTP. The server FTP's point of view is going to have the same 3 issues. It needs to prove the identity of the client. He needs to consider encrypting data while it's going over the network. And he needs to control who is allowed to upload and download what files. So we can sort this out a little bit, I think, if we set up an example. Suppose you have someone sitting at a Windows computer. Maybe you're the one sitting at a Windows computer, and you want to send a file to a Unix computer. So at your Windows computer, you log on and you start the FTP program. You know, this is the client FTP. Now, the Windows program is going to tell you sitting at your client computer are going to tell your version of FTP to talk first. And you're going to tell it the name or the address or the location of the other program, that is, it's on that Unix computer over there. And you're going to tell it to reach out and have a handshake. Your Windows computer, the client, is going to shake hands with the server computer, the Unix computer. Now, we hope that the FTP server program is already up and running. It's just sitting there waiting for some client to ask it to shake hands. So your FTP client on your Windows computer now shakes hands with the server FTP on the Unix computer. And the Unix computer is going to ask your Windows client computer to log on. So your Windows FTP program is going to ask you to enter a user ID and password, and then your client program will send that user ID and password to the server, and then you'll be invited to type in get and put commands. So in this example, let's think about how each of these computers handles the 3 issues. How does your computer know that it's really talking to that Unix computer? And how does the Unix computer know that it's really you that it's talking to? Second, do you need to encrypt the data? How does it get encrypted? And on the other side, how does it get decrypted? And what file access control? If you upload a file from your computer, what file access control is there on your computer to decide what you're allowed to read and therefore copy or upload to the other computer? If you're doing gets, if you're downloading files, the server computer should have file access control to decide whether you are allowed to download those files. So you could take that basic description we've just provided you, and you could repeat it with lots of different computers with uploads instead of downloads. You could have automated executions. You might have something that says, every Thursday at 3 o'clock in the morning, I want you to download file so-and-so from this server to that client. And so you can walk those through, but the basic outline of what happens and the security issues is all encapsulated very neatly in this one example. So we'll wrap up with a summary and a call to action. And you need to be thinking about some of these issues as you implement FTP. First, how do you know what files are transferred and to where? If you don't have logging of it, if you can't produce a report that says in the last day or week or month, these are all the files that were transferred, the from and the to, and how they were encrypted, if they were, what users were involved. Second, what encryption is needed, how is it enforced? You need to make the encryption automatic. If you rely on people to say, oh yeah, I remember their sensitive data, I'll make sure I turn on encryption when I do FTP, it won't happen. You can't rely on people. You need to automate it. So if you have, for example, credit card information, sometimes the credit card information will be passed from one computer to another. You might have someone, a cash register that's really a Windows computer, and it might take the credit card information and pass it to a departmental computer in the retail store. And the departmental computer might send the information to a mainframe that's doing credit card processing. So the ideal is, and some regulations require this, you don't want to encrypt and decrypt the data at each platform, at each computer it gets passed through. You want to encrypt the file once when it's sent out, and then decrypt it only when it gets to the end computer, the target computer. So you want to make sure that all the different versions of FTP that are being used work together. There are lots of different versions, and some of the older ones don't always work together well. So you also need to figure out how you're going to handle automated batch transfers, and you need to be sure that whatever laws and regulations are applicable are identified and enforced. You need to prevent data leakage, and we're talking about data loss prevention here. What stops a user who can read data from sending it somewhere where it shouldn't go? If someone can read the customer master file and maybe he needs it, or needs the access or thinks he needs it, so you give him read access to the customer master file. If someone offers him a bribe to make it available to the competition, what would stop him from sending it to the competition in exchange for a bribe or whatever? You want to make sure that FTP works cross-platform, cross-cultural, with all of these different conversion issues involved. And to do that, you need to make sure that every version of the FTP software that is involved anywhere in your network is compatible with all of the others. So how do you prove the identity of the other user? Sometimes you want to prove the identity of the other computer, and very often it's the identity of the other user you want. And sometimes we do this with a user ID and password, or a digital certificate, or Kerberos, or sometimes in FTP it's common you can say, if someone comes in, he can log on as anonymous. He doesn't have to prove his identity, but then the question of file access control becomes more important. If you use passwords to prove users' identities, then it will be important that you encrypt the password at least as it's going over the network. You also want to know what user IDs, what the user IDs are for the FTP programs. Each FTP program itself will have its own user ID distinct from the user ID of the person who is making the requests for gets and puts. And how do we handle the FTP file access? Do we give the user ID of the FTP program complete access to all the files so it can decide which users to download, which users to give access to the files? Or should we use other mechanisms to restrict the file access control in a more granular fashion, and what degree of standards and enforcement is called for. So we've got a lot of things to think about. I hope this has helped you to understand a little bit about how FTP works, what it's all about, what the security issues are, and how to walk through the steps of an FTP handshake and sign on and upload and download, and how to consider the security issues as you go through that all. If you'd like more information, here are some links to some useful sites, and I'd like to thank you for your kind attention.
Thank you, Stu, on that great explanation on how FTP works and also some of the security issues that customers need to be aware of when using FTP. So welcome everyone. Thank you for your time today. My name is Colin van der Ross, and I'm going to be providing you with a short overview of two products that will assist you if you are going through that migration process from securing your FTPs or those unsecured FTPs, securing them and making use of SFTP. The first product is SSH Tectia, and then a short explanation on VitalSigns for FTP. Then I'm going to be providing you with a live demonstration on how you can use these two products in migrating your batch FTP to SFTP. And the big thing to remember is that you do not have to change your existing FTP batch jobs. It is a seamless migration when using SSH Tectia and also VitalSigns for FTP. Lastly, we're going to be fielding some of those questions that you may have, so remember to place them in the question box and we'll address them after today's presentation. So let's get right to it. So what is SSH, or Secure Shell Protocol? The SSH communication security was founded in 1995, and these are the original developers of the Secure Shell Protocol. This product was taken from the distributed side and ported to run on ZOS. It is the de facto standard used by millions of users for secure remote login, command execution, file transfer, and also application tunneling. So if you have requirement to perhaps to secure your TN3270 data, you could consider using SSH, and that is what the application tunneling piece is of the product. It is the server application for SSH communication to and from the mainframe. Let's talk about some of the features of the product. So we spoke about it can secure file transfers, the secure application connectivity, and also secure system administration. The transparent FTP to SFTP conversion, I'm going to be showing you that in the live demonstration in a few minutes time, and also the FTP tunneling is two of the features that the product has. For those of you that are familiar with OpenSSH, you may remember that the direct or native ZOS dataset support is not in the product. With SSH Tectia, you decide where you want your dataset stored. So both you can store files in ZFS file systems, or if you want to, you can actually store them directly on ZOS. So there's no staging of the data, there's no using the ocopy command to get the files from ZFS back into ZOS. You decide on the SSH Tectia product where you want these files, where you want them stored. Then also the hardware acceleration of crypto operations that is supported on the product. You can configure that. For those users that need to send files from the mainframe to a Windows platform, you have the configurable ASCII to EBCDIC conversion. All of these SAF products, so RACF, ACF2, and Top Secret, is supported on SSH Tectia. And lastly, the SMF and syslog file transfer auditing is also supported on the product. So that was a short overview of the SSH Tectia product. Let's talk about what VFTP provides for you. Stu mentioned this in his part of the presentation about having that visibility. Sometimes your auditing folks want to know, what files are being sent to the mainframe, what files are being fetched from the mainframe. VFTP provides you with that complete visibility. So the monitoring and management of all FTP transfers, both inbound and outbound from the mainframe. Complete visibility, you can see the details of FTP transfers. You can actually see the context, so you can see the what the actual user did. You can be able to see the context of the FTP transfers. Failed transfers, problem transfers, completed transfers, secured versus unsecured transfers. Do you have some sort of an idea what percentage of your transfers, your FTP transfers, are unsecured? What are using SSH? What are using TLS? Those are all insight. This is what the VFTP can provide for you. You can get insight as to what is occurring on your COS environment. VFTP also has an automation piece to the product, so you can handle anomalies. It has a scripting language, something called FTP control language. So within a batch job, you can code up statements like the if statement, then, do, and else. One such example would be maybe to try or let's assume an FTP transfer fails. You can code this FTL statement within a batch job to retry the failed operation, wait 5 minutes, and then retry it again, maybe once or twice. If that then fails, maybe kick out a message to the system console or email a message to the production support guys to let them know that that FTP transfer has failed. So this is some of the automation that you can build in your batch jobs. It generates alerts and warning notifications, restart failed FTP transfers, and you can also terminate and warn on those really large FTP transfers in your environment. VFTP has security built into it, so I'm going to show this in a few minutes. The FTP client rule, where you can set up FTP, a specific batch job, or maybe a suite of batch jobs to be sent to the SSH proxy, and the proxy will convert that, and that is without having to make any JCL changes. Then perhaps you want to control access to commands like the site command, which is a pretty powerful command. Perhaps the change directory to a file or a PDS that somebody is not authorized to. You can be that granular and you can control the access as to what users can do from a change directory point of view. And also lastly, preventing users from submitting batch jobs through the internal reader. Those are all features that the product has, and you can implement that level of security if desired. Lastly, from an auditing point of view, do you need to go back maybe for a year or two? Maybe the auditors want to know what transpired on a specific day. VFTP has that capability. You can go back and see these FTP transfers. You can actually choose how long FTP transfers are stored inside of the VFTP database, and you can see the context of those FTP transfers and also the technical detail. It has a nice utility where you can extract information from the VFTP database into an Excel spreadsheet. One of our customers liked this piece where he was producing these management reports to show what activity was occurring in his environment, and that was specific to some of the remote IP transfers where they identified almost 1 terabyte worth of FTP transfers that they were not aware of. Then it also has the SMF reporting where you can write some sample batch reports. This is a quick overview of the product from an architecture point of view. So VFTP, the agents reside on ZOS. Wherever you want FTP visibility, you'll run this VFTP agent. It runs as a starter task. Then there is another two components to the product, the VFTP database and the server. So you log on to the server. All of the activity from the different agents are fed into the database. So when you log on to the server, you then query all of the information stored inside of this database. This is all part and parcel of the product, so you don't have to buy any additional software. The database comes with the VFTP product. We also enhance the standard FTP client with our VFTP client wrapper. So some of the features I spoke about initially, where you can see the context of FTP transfers, the FTP control language, those are all some of the nice features which allow us to perform some of this on VFTP when you make the VFTP client wrapper or when you implement the VFTP client wrapper. There's some exits that need to be installed at standard exit points. That's an optional piece to the product. And then lastly, we make use of the NMI to harvest all of the information from the TCPIP stack, which is stored in the VFTP database. Then how does this all hang together with VFTP and the SSH Tectia product? Remember the standard, we enhanced the standard IBM FTP client with our VFTP client wrapper, and I'm going to show you this to you in a second or two. You set up batch jobs on the VFTP client rule, and when a batch job matches the client rule, we will intercept that batch job. We will route it to the Tectia SOCKS proxy. You configure the SOCKS proxy to convert the FTP to SFTP. Again, no JCL changes required, and it is sent to the remote end, and you have some sort of secure shell SFTP server or client on the remote end. So that's the two products hanging together. This is the complete solution that it provides. So let's get to the live demo. I'm going to switch to VFTP. I'm already logged on to the product. On the left hand side, these are the standard queries that get shipped with the product. So out of the gates, you don't have to do any intense customization. I've selected to run a protection mechanism query. I've said for the last 7 days, show me all of the FTP activity on all of the mainframes here in the SDS environment. So here you can see we've got a lot of FTPs that's running unsecured. We also have some using SSH, and we also have some that is using that proxy function to convert the FTP to SFTP. I could change the query. I could say, all right, just show me for the last 8 hours. Hit the get button, and now you can see some of the transfers. Looks like we have a bunch running unsecured. I've clicked on that numeric, the 495, and now it's broken it out for me. And now I can select one particular FTP transfer. So here you can see, for example, just by leaving my cursor on any one of these, it'll tell me whether this particular FTP works successfully or not. So I've selected one FTP transfer. I'm going to the bottom, and now I can see the details of this one that I've selected. So good information, the transfer information. You can see the start time of this FTP, the user ID, the remote user ID, all specific information about this one transfer. Then the file information, performance information, and also session information about this one transfer that I've selected here. This is totally customizable, and as you can see, the detail that you're seeing on your screen at the bottom is also available on the right hand side. By dragging it to the right, you can see some other information about that FTP transfer. I can now click on the session log, then hit the get session log for the row selected above, and I can see the actual context of this FTP. So what did this user do? What commands did he issue? And also some of the failures. And here you can see the VFTP will let you know if this FTP transfer worked or not. You can see the confidence of success factor was low, and this particular one, it looks like there was a space problem on this FTP transfer. So that is consistent throughout the product. I could, for example, go to remote IP, and now I can see all of the remote IP transfers over the last 8 hours. So here's an IP address. Let's have a look what this particular user did. There's 10 transfers, and there you can see some of the activity from this particular user ID. This was one of the queries that I mentioned earlier that the user was using. He was exporting those reports from the product, and they identified almost 1 terabyte worth of FTP transfers that they were not aware of. That's the remote IP. I can also see what FTPs occurred from a batch point of view over the last 8 hours. Let's go down to the last hour, hit the get button, and now I can also see a graphical representation of the FTP transfers at the bottom, and you can also break that out into different types of charts if you want to. Do you know what the top 10 is? The top longest, the 10 longest FTPs in your environment. So there you can see them from a bytes transfer point of view, the duration of them, and also the 10 largest over the last hour, and there you can see some of the information. By clicking on any one of these tabs, you can sort it from highest to lowest, and also alphabetically. Alright, so let's get to the part of the demonstration that you're really interested in. That was just a quick overview of the visibility that VFTP provides you. Let's click on the configuration tab, and let's open up the VFTP client configuration. So this is one of our test servers. We got a bunch of rules here. They're performing different functions. They all have different batch jobs. But for today's illustration, I'm going to use one called FTP SFTP3. So remember that name because I'm going to point back to that in a minute or two. Right now, this rule is enforced. So you can see I've got it enforced. It's only running, or it's only being applied on an agent called STS1. As you can see, there's some of the other agents, but if I wanted it applied on all agents, I can say, all right, set it as a global wide parameter, but let's leave it for the STS1 agent. Right now, it's only going to be applied to a batch job that begins with the words ZFTP job star. So it could be job 1, job A. It doesn't really matter. That star is going to catch any batch job that begins with this criteria. You can also set a description so you know what it's all about. You can have as many of these rules as you want. I'm guessing through the migration phase you might want to just start off with one batch job and then slowly open up that filter. So there's a number of different operands that need to be configured in your FTP data file. I've chosen to use an external one. One of the operands that need to be added to this FTP data is the firewall friendly operand, for example. So that's something that needs to be added. And also the SOCKS configuration file. So there's some configuration files that need to be configured for using or when making use of the SOCKS proxy. Very importantly, we're saying the sessions for this job step must run across a SOCKS proxy. So anytime this batch job runs, VFTP is going to intercept the batch job. It's going to route it to the SOCKS proxy, and the SOCKS proxy is going to convert that batch job from FTP command syntax to SFTP. So let's close this out. I don't want to make any changes. Remember, I made the change over there, so I'm going to click no. And let's switch to TSO. And let's do a prefix of SSH to show you that the product is up and running. There's SSH T2, that's the main component of the product, listening on port 22. And I also have the SOCKS proxy running as a starter task on the mainframe. In addition to that, I also have the VFTP agent running. So this is the STS1. Remember, you saw that it's only applying to the STS1 agent. Okay, so you got a feel for the two products. They're running on our environment. Let's switch, and I'm going to show you. Here's a batch job that's called ZFTP job. So you can see regular command syntax. There's nothing to it. The user ID and the password, and we're just doing a CD and doing a bin and then doing a put of a file. So nothing. This is no rocket science over here. You've seen this before. Let's submit this batch job and let that run, and let's flip the screen. Let's change our prefix to ZFTP, and there's a job running at the moment. Let's select it and let's go to the bottom and let's see what's transpiring in this batch job. So I'm just going to go a few lines up again. There you can see it's applying the rule FTP SFTP3. Remember, you saw that was the name of the rule. In this particular case, it's connecting, and there's some verbiage inside of the batch job that's getting kicked out because this batch job was intercepted by the proxy. There you can see FTP to SFTP conversion. We've configured the proxy to convert this batch job, and now you can see no changes to my JCL. The job worked and the transfer was successful. So let's go back to VFTP and let's go to secure transfers. Let's go for maybe for the last 30 minutes. Hit the get button, and there you can see my user ID BCVR1. I can see the details of this transfer, but let's go view the session log, and exactly the same information you saw when I was logged on TSO in STSF. They're applying the rule FTP SFTP3, and now you can see this particular batch job was converted to SFTP. So that's how simple it is. If you're in that migration process and you have some time constraints to convert your FTP to SFTP, this is one of the ways that you can consider without making any JCL changes. Sometimes that can be a huge undertaking. Perhaps you don't have the resources to do this. The product using VFTP and SSH Tectia combined with the proxy, you can convert those FTPs to SFTP and become compliant in a shorter space of time. Thank you everyone for your time. I'm going to hand it back to Yvonne now to field some of those questions and also to wrap up the session. Thanks everyone.
Thank you, Colin, for that informative demo and product presentation. We did get some questions, so we'll go ahead and start with those. The first one is, do you need a client on your PC to use VFTP, and what FTP clients does SSH Tectia support?
Okay, Yvonne, yeah, that's a good question. Firstly, the first part to that question is you do not need a client on your PC to use VFTP. Essentially, people log on to the VFTP web server, and all you need is a browser, so you know, Firefox, IE, any one of those. So you do not need a client for VFTP. However, when you're making use of the SSH Tectia product, let's assume you are sending data from the mainframe to a Windows box, you will need some sort of an SSH server or client on the remote end. VFTP supports, shall I say, SSH Tectia supports a number of SSH clients. We have our own SSH client, the Tectia client and server, which people can use. However, I know a lot of customers that do make use of clients like PuTTY. Those are certainly supported. So for the most part, even if you have your own SSH client, you will find that SSH Tectia will work with that client. There shouldn't be any issues, and even if it doesn't work, we will work with customers to try and get it working.
Okay, great. Thanks, Colin. I think this is another one for you here. It's what database does VFTP use, and where does the product run?
Okay, you may remember me talking about this during the architecture slide. So firstly, the product uses something called a Derby database, and that's spelled D-E-R-B-Y. This is open source software. You do not have to purchase any additional software in order to use this database, so it comes with the product. It's packaged with VFTP. When running the database and the web server, customers have a number of options. They can choose to run the product on the mainframe, so it runs under USS, runs as a starter task, and you can incorporate it into your existing startup and shutdown procedures. We also provide the flexibility for customers to run the database and also the web server off the mainframe. So if you want to maybe conserve CPU cycles and you're considering running it perhaps on a Windows platform, Unix and Linux are also options that customers can choose to run the database and the web server. So let's be clear on that. You can run it off the mainframe. We find for most part, in our experience, customers tend to run the product on the mainframe as a starter task. I think as ZOS folks, we want to keep control of our software, and that way I find that most customers elect to running the product on the mainframe. One thing to remember, if you do choose to run the product off the mainframe, let's assume you go with the Windows option, you would still need a VFTP agent on all of the LPAs that you want FTP visibility. So that agent runs as a starter task, and you will then connect the agent to the VFTP database on Windows. So that's typically how the product works and how it all hangs together.
Okay, I have a question about ConnectDirect. The question is, can VFTP show transfers that use ConnectDirect? And Colin, can you take this one as well?
Yes, I'll take that one. So that's a pretty short answer. The answer is no. We do not provide visibility for transfers that use ConnectDirect. VFTP will only show you all FTP transfers that is using the TCPIP stack. So both inbound and outbound transfers, we provide visibility on those transfers. So the short answer is no, we do not show transfers that use ConnectDirect.
Okay, thanks, Colin. The next one is, can you use wildcards when setting up batch jobs to be routed to the proxy?
Good question, Yvonne, and I'm guessing the customer is thinking about when they're going down this migration path and they don't want to be coding, multiple batch jobs in the VFTP client. So the answer is yes. You could, for example, set up a batch job. Perhaps the batch job begins with something like prod, so P-R-O-D, and you could say P-R-O-D star. So that means any batch job that begins with the words P-R-O-D will be routed to the proxy, or VFTP will intercept that batch job and route it to the proxy. You can also use the question mark, so you could say PROD question mark 1, for example, and the question mark in this particular case is any one character. So any one character that matches that filter, VFTP will intercept those batch jobs and route them to the proxy. And remember, in the illustration we showed the proxy intercepting them and converting those FTPs to SFTP without any JCL changes.
Okay, great, thanks. The next one is about FTP connections. How can you see what cipher was used on an FTP connection?
Okay, so again, when you're using the product, as I mentioned previously, we show all of the FTP transfers. If you're using unsecured, if you're using TLS, if you're using SSH, we basically show all of that transfers on the VFTP user interface. If you click on the Details tab on that FTP transfer, we do provide visibility on what cipher was used on the FTP connection. Perhaps you didn't see that. I might have not shown that during the live demonstration, but that information is available on the details section of the on the product. Another place that you can view it is when you're viewing an FTP transfer. You may remember me showing you the information. So using the slider bar, dragging it to the right-hand side, you will be able to see what cipher was used on that FTP connection. So yes, you can see what cipher was used for that FTP transfer.
Okay, terrific. We are running out of time here, but I think we have time for one more question. So Colin, you're very popular today. This one looks like a very specific to Tectia here. So does Tectia replace IBM's ported tools, does Tectia replace IBM's ported tools SSH, or does it lay on top of OpenSSH like other tools?
Okay, so again, that's a great question. People are aware that ported tools comes with the base of ZOS. IBM, the product we spoke about today, SSH Tectia, for the most part replaces that particular solution. So there are some limitations when using OpenSSH, and as you may remember, I pointed some of them out to you, where the SSH Tectia has the direct access to ZOS datasets, and if you're using OpenSSH, you have to get an extension, sometimes another product that allows you that direct access to ZOS datasets. But for what we've seen in most custom environments, when they go down this path evaluating SSH Tectia, it is always a replacement product. So we never really see customers using both. SSH Tectia is always a replacement. It provides the same functionality and additional functionality. You may remember me talking about perhaps considering using your or encrypting your TN3270 data using SSH, so you can tunnel that information. But that was a long-winded answer. The short answer is most times people just replace the SSH Tectia product, they replace it with the IBM supported tools.
Okay, thanks again. And again, we are out of time, so I want to thank Bob Thomas and Stu Henderson and Colin Vander Ross for helping us with this presentation and going through the Q&A. If you have any questions, please feel free to send us an email at info@sdsusa.com or give us a call, and we will be happy to answer any questions. And anyone else we have not gotten to today, we'll get back to you as soon as possible with an email response. Again, thank you for joining us today. This concludes our presentation.